What is the art of asking a good question?
The art of asking a great question is about
Today's guest is a part of the 1% of podcasts. Whether building relationships, honing the skill of asking questions, providing effective diligence in his research, thoughtfulness in his contributions to society, his sincerity, curiosity, and hard work all culminate in spectacular interviews of high achievers across all different types of industries with a common thread of what it takes to be the best. A podcaster and now officially a course creator after the launch of his latest venture, The Art of Interviewing, please welcome the host of the Danny Miranda Podcast, Mr. Danny Miranda. How are you today, sir?
I am doing incredible. Thank you for the very, very kind introduction. I really appreciate learning how I am putting out my energy into the world by the reflection of others. So thank you so much for the kind intro, and I really appreciate it.
Of course, man. Well, you earned it. And in the spirit of how you start your interviews, I think I'd be a little bit remiss if I didn't honor a bit of that theme. So I'm going to do it a bit differently than how I start mine. And I'm going to ask you an unconventional question that I wouldn't otherwise. What does being a brother mean to you?
Being a brother to me means connecting. The first person that comes to mind is my brother Max, who I actually haven't spoke about too much on the podcast in general. And my brother is everything that people know me as, but he just does it privately. Like, he's a warmth, he's a ball of energy, he's super smart, he asks great questions, he's really interested, he's the best gift giver alive, I'm pretty sure. One time he gave me a gift of my podcast logo in Times Square. Like, this is in 2020 or 2021 when billboard space wasn't that it wasn't like that expensive. But I mean, it's so fascinating that you asked that question because I've never got that question before. And as he fist bumps through the screen, I love it. And I don't talk about my brother a lot, but the truth is, it's like he is to me, I have such a strong connection with him through love of just like, that is a good human being. That's a great human being. And so for me, being a brother is looking at him and being like, how do I connect more with what he is? So thank you so much for asking the question and getting me to reflect on my amazing brother who I have a call with after the great day is over. So thank you.
I think it's a great start to setting the tone in this type of interview. Ironically, I was listening to another couple great podcasters this morning. Rich Roll interviewed Stephen Bartlett. And Rich Roll had asked Stephen, how he starts his interviews. He noticed that Stephen asked how the individual is doing. And Stephen had responded that it's important to find out how the individual is doing because, when he asked Simon Sinek, Simon responded, "I'm feeling lonely." So all the research that he had done, it kind of got out the window, and the next 2 hours ended up being about loneliness. For me, in this spirit, it was really about, giving the audience a feel in the community, a feel for who you are, your character, and understand the individual who's always asking other phenomenal individuals these great questions. And in that same spirit, Danny, what is the art of asking a good question?
Well, you asked a great one to open it up. The art of asking a great question is about getting the person to explore and open up their world and get them thinking in ways that perhaps they weren't thinking before. It's getting them to creatively think about new things that they haven't spoke about before over and over and over again. A great question is one that enhances both of your worlds, the question asker, but also the person who's being asked. And a great question helps highlight new information that helps propel people forward. So for me, that's what I'm trying to do. I don't always succeed, but when I do, it feels so good. Like that fist bump that you gave, like it feels so good to know you just opened up that person's world in a way that they hadn't been thinking in a long, long time. So that's kind of what I think about when I think about great questions.
And another part of that is when you do your work, there is, and you've been commended on it many times, an immense amount of research. And I think it's also important to level set, with this particular interview, some of this is going to be about figuring out sharing who Danny Miranda is and everything you're up to and have accomplished, but also getting insight into how you go about your skill set, acquiring your skill set, developing it, honing your craft. So other people out there could, just like with your course, The Art of Interviewing, could start to develop those skills themselves. So how do you weigh your research? What's worth it to address, maybe leave out? Could you maybe give the audience a feel for some of your research strategies?
So when I'm doing research on a guest, I am thinking, what is calling me and what is moving me emotionally in some way? And so it's either they say something funny and I'll smirk to myself and I'll notice that reaction within myself and be like, huh, that's interesting that I had that reaction to them. Or they'll say something wise and I'll be like, I didn't think about the world that way. Let me write that down. And so what I'm really looking for in research and what I'm looking for in the actual conversation interview is, what are the parts of what this person said that are not similar to the way they're acting in some way? Like, what is if you imagine like a graph, like a heart monitor graph where what's the part where it's like spikes, or I feel a spike in something they said. And so when I'm doing research, I could tell you all the tactics that I do, right? Like I go through Twitter, I go through Google, I go through YouTube and go to their most recent and all this stuff. But really, like at the heart of it is like, I'm looking for the abnormality in their behavior, in something they say, or something insightful. And I'm going through all their writing and all their stuff with that in mind. Is that helpful?
It's very helpful because you qualified it as an abnormality. I think everyone, when they're looking for something like me and asking you the first question and doing my research and weighing what mattered, I was like, how can I relate to this person, or at least pick out the abnormality as it relates to me, right? Because being a brother means so much to me. I knew that on some stratosphere it may resonate with you. I was gonna mention him by name, but I didn't want to go too deep in the weeds. I was leaving that to you. But I did have his name here just in case.
I love that. Well, what does being a brother mean to you?
I think being a brother. Thank you for asking the question. For me, being a brother is a lot of it comes down to accountability, but also I'm the oldest of four, so it's always been about setting the standard and being a role model, if you will, to some degree. Not that my way is the way, but if I'm gonna make the mistakes, like I hope that they learn from those mistakes so they don't repeat them. So in a lot of ways, I'm looking to pave a path, but not so much a path that it becomes like follow this way. It's just so that it's clear for them along the way and they don't have to stumble on the same rocks, they don't have to endure the same scars, and hopefully have a smoother path to not necessarily an easier life, but hopefully one that becomes more meaningful sooner than I was able to find meaning in my life. And I think that's a big part of what being a brother means to me, just having that accountability, responsibility, and setting the stage for all my siblings in the healthiest ways that I know how.
And what's the age difference there?
Boy, girl every 2 years.
Gotcha. And it's so funny, and I wonder if it's because you had sisters. Did it take on a different meaning? Because personally, I never felt any responsibility for my brother's development. I don't know if I was outsourcing that to my parents, or I just knew he was good, or could tell at a young age that he had a good head on his shoulders. Like, I don't know I never compared myself to him. I never felt like leading him or in any way. So it's interesting, like hearing you reflect that and say all that, because I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. What do you make of that? What's going on there?
I think a big part of it is you never know when someone's watching. So a big part of it is still upholding that responsibility. And there's as a former prosecutor, I remember cases would come across my desk all the time, and I'd be like, God, I hope this like works out in a just whatever the right thing is that's supposed to happen. I hope it works out and that it's not like tainted in any way because it was me, or the mindset of like, this case is too crazy, like this is wrong that this happened. But even the point is, if the case comes across your desk, it becomes your responsibility even if you didn't ask for it. And I think that that's the big takeaway, that even if you're not actively leading or actively doing those things, it still is your responsibility to be the best that you possibly can. And I weigh that very heavily. So that's what resonates with me, at least. But, getting back to you, as much as I'd love to be on the Danny Miranda podcast, one day, once it's earned. But till then, I I think when starting the interview, it's also very difficult to know like what's going to be the through line or the theme. We talked a bit about how some of the top podcasters out there do it. How do you choose where to start an interview?
I'm trying to look for the place that, one, they normally don't get asked, and two, that will open them up to understand my intentions. So I tell the guest before it starts, like, this is the purpose of this is to help you learn something about yourself. And I'm sure they hear that and they're like, okay, like, what can you really teach me about myself? I've done all this work and and then I start with a question like, what does being a brother mean to you? Or, like something deep like that really hits them. And then they're like, oh, this is something different than a podcast. This is like a therapy session, or this is like a real understanding of who I am. Oh, wow. He mentioned this. Like, I haven't thought about that in a long time. And so, you can really teach someone something about themselves. And that's really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to like get them to remember a part of them that they might have forgot in this moment so that they can be opened up to new insights and explore.
And I think in taking a step back, for those who don't know who Danny Miranda is, if you're living under a rock or something, I know the story of how you got into podcasting, starting with phone conversations and, realizing you needed to record those conversations and share those lessons and insights. When did you realize when did you start thinking about what the Danny Miranda podcast could be in terms of what it's become?
Literally the first episode. Like, it's great. Like, I just have this sense, this feeling, this knowing, of like, this is my path. This is the clear direction for me. And whether people see it or not, or how long it takes, it doesn't matter to me. Because I already in my head, I'm like, this is the biggest thing in the world. Like, and I say that with humility of like, I know it's not. I know there's hundreds of people viewing on YouTube, not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. But it's like this weird mix of like balancing the reality you see, but the delusion that is reality of tomorrow at the same time, because this path is truly your own and that this is what you've been called here to do. I feel that. And so however you view the podcast, like I view it 10 times bigger in a 10 times like crazier way. And I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. I just know I have, incredible parents and incredible brother and incredible family who like knows that it doesn't even matter if I achieve my wildest dreams or not. I'm still loved. And that's the most important piece at the end of the day. And so, yeah, it's a cool insight of like, when did I realize that it would be this, right? Honestly, like it was this from the beginning to me. So I love that.
Same, man. It's so cool. It's the vision, right? It's the vision of what it is and what it will be. And I'm curious, were there any exercises that you were doing, if it was journaling or outlining, like what is like the through line of this podcast? How did you come to identify the theme? Like, it's a podcast named after yourself. At one point you even contemplated changing the name. I'm glad you didn't. I think Twitter was also very happy you didn't. When it comes to figuring out the theme of the pod, how did you go about coming to that conclusion?
Yeah, so that's one thing that I haven't come to any conclusion on the theme of the podcast, people have come to conclusions on, oh, this is people who are high performers, or oh, that's just people I'm interested in. And those happen at this point. This moment is like a lot of runners, a lot of entrepreneurs, because I'm running and I'm building a business, right? So it's like when I'm parenting, I'm sure there'll be a lot of parents, and when I'm raising grandchildren, I'm sure there'll be a lot of grandparents. So I think like it is just reflective of what stage of life I'm in and what I'm fascinated by. And that's subject to change, and that's open, and that's the beauty of having a 50-year vision. It's just like, this could be whatever I want it to be, because it's going to be here for a long time. So that gives you the flexibility to go down different rabbit holes.
And you kind of touched on it there. Well, on one side, you didn't answer the question, and on the other side, you completely did. Because I feel personally that when I look at it, it speaks for itself, right? It's a show named after you, but then the caliber of the guest, obviously, it's like, okay, I get what this is about. It speaks for itself, which is very like I'm learning about it as I'm sharing it, right? Like I'm literally thinking about your entire guest list. And my next question is, and I know you've posed it to another podcaster, David Senra, how he goes about curating his guest list. That's where we're going. But when I look at the over 400 plus episodes, the quality, the caliber, the amount of research and reading and patience and time commitment and editing and posting and starting with one episode going to 3 a week, like it's a crazy trajectory in a very short period of time, because it's also important to level set that your podcast started in 2020.
September 2020. Yes, sir.
That's
3 years
crazy. We're like 3 years and a month in, over 400 episodes. Crazy, man. Congrats on that.
Thank you.
So how do you go about curating your guest list?
I look at, I mean, there's so many different sources. I'm taking in so much input in any given day. Like I'm reading books, I'm going on Twitter, I'm listening to podcasts, I'm on YouTube, and I'm like, what is getting me to spike? Right? Like, oh wow, this dude Ken Rideout is the fastest 50 plus mile, like he runs sub 230 miles and he's over 50 years old. Like, how the hell does he do this? And like, how can I explore him in a way that's interesting to me? And what's so interesting is that it gets easier the more that I do it, meaning that I had no connection to Ken Rideout when I was at episode 100. I had no connection to him at episode 200. You do 300 episodes, now there's connection points to all these people. And so everyone I'm fascinated by, not everyone, but many of the people I'm fascinated by, I can actually interview. And so that's been a really cool part of like, oh, the ball's down the hill at this point, because this person had a good experience. And if that person had a good experience and is connected to that person, they're going to say, hey, you should also have a good experience, right? That's what we tell our friends. You have a good experience? Okay, I want to have a good experience too. And a lot of these people are really wealthy, and like they can buy whatever they want. So what do they want? They want experiences. David Senra talks about this all the time. So what I'm giving people is an experience, and I curate my guest list by understanding or feeling who are the people that I would like to experience. That's kind of how it's shaped out thus far.
It's definitely something I relate to, again, because, and you've interviewed Sahil Bloom twice. He talks about exploring his curiosity and sharing what he learns along the way. Again, like these are sentiments that I find the way you go about distilling the actionable steps that people have taken and then sharing those lessons, calling them out, whether it's something as simple as like, here's a remote, experience that happened with a secret inside joke that you're asking this one person about what happened in the fifth period, or about an old nickname or something like that. Somehow you connect that to their success, and it goes in this like reverse engineered path towards understanding who the individual was at a young age, and then slowly evolving into who they become. And as you explore your curiosity, you mentioned that right now you're in the theme and the season of running and building a business. Are there certain anchors or themes that you'd really like to, how am I going to ask this? Are there certain anchors or themes that you're spending additional time investigating?
Endurance and presence are two that just keep popping up over and over again. So starting with endurance, it's like running is teaching me the lesson that I knew from the start of building the podcast is like, this is going to take a long time. You want to run a sub 3 hour marathon? Okay. Like you got to be thinking years. You can't just be thinking about this current level that we're at. Like, okay, we have to invest a lot of time, a lot of energy. And okay, that's on the macro. Then on the micro, you're at mile 4 in a run and you start feeling it and you're like, all right, we got another 6 to go. Let's go. That's endurance. And then you take that into a podcast where it's an hour in, you're loving it. And you're like, all right, how do I build this out for another hour? Right. Like that's what I'm thinking about. Like, how do I take the hours that I'm doing, the hour 20, and how do I build them to 3 hour episodes? That's going to take endurance in the micro. And so I think running's teaching me that you can go on a 3 hour run. Like I could not go on a 3 hour run 3 months ago. Like that was just not a possibility. But now I feel like I could. I think the max that I've ran so far is like 2 hours, 30 minutes, something like that. So we're getting there, right? So endurance is the first one. And then presence is the other. I have realized that like part of what makes the podcast successful is that I'm with the person. Like I'm not in a different world. I'm not trying to get to the next question. I'm just like with them. And so for me, if that's my skill, if that's what I'm bringing to the table, then I need to deepen that. And how do you deepen that? You practice it in real life. So like now I'm walking around with no headphones on. I'm walking around seeing how I can light someone up. And this is hard for me because I love listening to podcasts. I love listening and being in my own world. But now I'm trying to be like, how do I increase my presence? And I think those two things, when I'm running and when I'm building business, it's endurance and it's presence. And if I can get those two right, I mean, I think the world is your oyster for anyone.
Again, sharing sentiments that apply from two different fields: business, fitness, podcasting, and bringing it all together. For just geeking out for a second, who is the interview that you were like, oh my God, I'm freaking out? I can't believe this person just said yes. And then like up even until like you finished, like once you finish and like it was in the cloud and you're like, all right, this actually is like, it's mine now. Who is that
Dude,
person from start to finish where you just felt like the nerves and jitters the entire time?
I didn't feel nerves and jitters, but Andy Frisella was like the moment, episode 346, which is wild to think that it hasn't even been 100 episodes since that moment. I was just like, what type of dream am I living in? I was so high. The reason being is that I did 75 hard in September 2019. I was depressed out of my mind, and doing the program helped elevate me to a new state of consciousness and a new appreciation for I can do the difficult thing. I do that interview, and afterwards he's like, that was the best interview that I've ever done.
Wow.
You are the best. And so imagine like someone changing your life in that way, and then for them to have that response. And so I am literally, my fingers are crossed. I'm like, I pray to God there's no issues with the audio. I pray to God there's no issues with the video. Oh, my friend Hunter's in the background. I'm like, and it's just like, you just don't know, because you don't know like if it can go to the cloud, and like I'm waiting to get this out there. And I'm like, all right, it's out there. Like now I can breathe. But that was the one where I was like, this must be fake. So yeah, that was the one where it just like changed my entire being and gave me so much confidence in something that I was already confident in. But to have somebody you respect so much say something like that about you, like I can't tell. I wish that for every person breathing, to get that validation and appreciation from someone that they truly love.
That is a very cool story. I've seen the content, obviously, of him commending you, but to hear like firsthand your interaction and feedback from it, I thought you were going to say Hormozy, but that obviously, in person. And I guess while we're talking about presence and those special moments, How did you know when to start doing these interviews in person? What was the catalyst that started to take it in another direction?
So I kept asking myself, like, how can I make this better over and over and over again? And so I must have done the first 227 episodes. First 38 were audio only. And then Gary Vaynerchuk agrees to come on. And that's episode 39. And now I'm like, all right, I got to do video. And so now I'm doing video podcasts. The rest 39 to 227 are online virtual interviews. And then Noah Kagan, who I'd been following for a long time, he's episode 228. He said, yo, come over to my house and record an interview. And I'm like, this is the craziest thing of all. Like, I was geeking out about that one, episode 228. Now Noah is a friend of mine and he's hopefully coming back at the end of the year. He wants to come back on the show. But I mean, to me, it was just a natural progression and a natural, like, oh, like this is the next step. This is the next step. This is, and so I was doing so many of them. Like, the first year I did 3 a week. The second year I did 2 a week. And the third year I went back to 3 a week. And it's like when you do so many, you start seeing, okay, I could make the thumbnail better, or, oh, I can make the video better, or, oh, I can improve my background. Oh, I could. And so like, there's so many little things that I'm learning and I'm still learning to this day. And it was with the question of how can I make this better always? So yeah, that was the process.
Those incremental improvements and the hyper awareness around constantly trying to do better, be better, perform better, that can get overwhelming. That is like also debilitating at points. I mean, I know firsthand from my experience, but how do you draw the line between your sanity and knowing that something needs to improve?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the truth is, I say all this, but I actually don't think about it all too much. And there have been many months which I have not, quote unquote, improved anything from the external perspective. But I know I'm still making progress because I'm still moving forward in some sense. And so this to me isn't like improve or be upset with yourself. To me, this is just like, I love doing this. How can I keep doing this? Oh, let's make it better. Oh, we could go in person. Oh, like it's more of a carefreeness to it because I know I'm doing it for 50 years. Try to meet somebody who's been lifting weights for 30 years and isn't in great shape. Like it's really impossible, right? Like it just sounds ridiculous. And so I know the same thing. If I show up to this podcast 3 times a week for 30 years, it's going to be successful. Like there's just no other way. And so I've been doing it for 3 years now for context. I'm 10% of the way there. And I guarantee in 10 years, I'll be in pretty good shape, like better shape than 99.9% of people. So that's kind of how I think about it. I view the improvements as just like part of going to the gym. It makes it fun. It makes it enjoyable. And it's just like, I'm doing this for a long time, so might as well make it a little better, right?
I love the time horizon perspective on it. There's a lot of patience in your approach, and that is a vital sign of someone who already is successful, but who ultimately will be, because you're not putting a cap on your success. You're aligning the future you, understanding the habits and understanding the work commitment, the work capacity, and the time horizon that's required in order to eventually and inevitably get to where you know you're going. Because you've interviewed so many people that I have interviewed. Let's touch on one other topic before we get into that. Why is interviewing so important? Like, what do you get out of it? Like, what made you want to do this? I think it's very important also to just ground the audience right now and help them gather, just in general, whether you own a mic and you're a podcaster or not. Why is interviewing others so important?
For me, it's like it makes me a better human being because now I have new perspectives of the world that I otherwise never had. And one, like all the insights themselves help me while I'm going about my day to day. But 2, it's teaching me the presence that's required so that when I'm going about my day to day, I can just interact with people in a more free-flowing, carefree, helpful manner. And the other thing is like the amount of times people will tell me today, that's a great question in conversation is remarkable. Like it's, and the reason why it stands out is because that never happened. Like all my life, no one ever said to me, that's a great question. That's a great, like it was not something I heard. It's a skill that I've built for myself of giving people new ways of looking at the world. And I think that that's why interviewing is so important, because it helps you give people that you're talking to more perspectives. And when you give people more perspectives, they are happy because now they are seeing reality more clearly.
So well said, man. So well said. Because you literally talked about it as in its essence, in all its glory. More perspective helps shape reality, so there's more empathy and in turn more communication as a result. And we talk about it a lot on this pod, having words for your words. Because most people can't express themselves, right? They don't have enough words. So the more you read, the more you can understand, or the more you listen to podcasts, the more words you have. You're like, hey, what this person's saying resonates with me because they're clearly articulating their thoughts, their points, and it's making sense. And now I feel I can express myself better, so I don't have to fight with this person. I don't have to miscommunicate or misunderstand something else that someone's saying. And I can actually just enjoy my life a bit more, be a bit more present, not think about what was or what could be, but just about what is. So in that same spirit, you've interviewed quite a lot of successful individuals, we'll call them, and a few in particular that stand out for me, at least. I could go down the list, but I'm gonna hop on this David Senra topic that we addressed earlier, just because I feel like he's a fascinating individual and a podcaster as well. You guys talked about Naval Ravikant, and one of the things that you brought up was the concept of how to succeed in the modern world, and something that Naval addresses specifically is that you're either creating code or creating media. And obviously we know where each of us falls on that side of the spectrum. But when it comes to, leveraging that idea of creating media and putting out that content, what is it that you hope each interview, each piece of content communicates to your audience?
I'll answer that, but I first want to wrap this around to my brother, who is a coder himself and a software engineer. And I found that interesting how he came to code and I came to media just before knowing the Naval quote. So that's a fascinating insight. What I hope my media hopes to do and really leave people with is I have two intentions for my life. One is I would love to make the world happier, healthier, and wiser. And two, I'd love to raise the consciousness of humanity. And those are very broad macro ideas. And I attempt to do them day to day in the micro as best as I humanly can. And I know that when I'm doing those things to the best of my abilities, my life is better. And the people's lives around me are better as well. So I hope people feel like they have a greater sense of ability for their own level of consciousness. Like they have words for their words. Like I love that concept. I love that idea. They have a greater sense of reality. And I hope that they come away with it feeling happier, healthier, or wiser in some respect. So that's what I'm really trying to get to with people. And I'm trying to use the people that I interview as a way to explore their own world so that people who are listening can also reflect and be like, yeah, that sounds right. Or that's interesting. My perspective is something different. And get people thinking along those lines with the questions that I ask.
It's a very commendable mission to want to elevate the collective consciousness. Very ambitious one as well.
Yeah.
I think what is interesting in that particular space is, especially with where the world is going, what you do, what David does, many other successful podcasters, is that we understand something very uniquely about what the mic holds, the wisdom of the mic, if you will. And I'm curious your take. What is the future of podcasting?
I think, like David Senra and I love to talk about, this is the printing press for audio. Like this is so crazy, this invention of just two people being able to have a conversation that now can get broadcast to anyone, anywhere, anytime, and only 2/3 of the world is on the internet. To me, I think the future of podcasting looks like there's more translations to more languages. So people will be listening to this in Spanish in 10 years. And that's just like the way it is, or 5, or, who knows? Or it could be this year. I think the future of podcasting is more video based, like Riverside, like we're talking right now. And you see more and more video podcasts pop up on YouTube every day. I think the future of podcasting is more immersive. Like you saw Lex Friedman talk to Mark Zuckerberg in the metaverse. And it's like, what is that? And like they both are, Lex is saying this is like a real experience. Like this feels like maybe 60, 70% of reality. I can't see your body. I can't see what your legs are doing. I can't really see your arms. But imagine like we could. How much more immersive is that going to be? Like how, I don't like, to me, that's so exciting. I think the future of podcasting looks like the most recent Lex Friedman, Mark Zuckerberg episode. And I think it will just, the means of communication. To me, like I realize that my life is just a study of communication. And to see where it's going, I have no idea, but I'm excited by it, as you can tell.
What I'm also excited about when it comes to the future is that, we obviously don't know, but something's going on where people are now just able to share their thoughts openly. There's almost like these two sides, right? Where some people believe everyone should have a podcast, and then there's some people who are like, that's not really a thing. It's just a nice sentiment, right? But as you see your brand grow, and now you've released your first course, The Art of Interviewing, what prompted that? And what's next for the Danny Miranda podcast?
Yeah. So for me, it's just continue out and build the mission that I'm on. Have incredible conversations with some of the most interesting people to me, and hope that it resonates with other people. And really, like, how can I improve as an interviewer? How can I get better? How can I like just continue to light up guests? Like to me, that's just what it's all about. How can I continue to grow outside of the podcast to build it into the podcast? How can I give myself chosen suffering outside so that I can bring that into? So like to me, that's what it's all about. Continually elevating myself, growing myself, and building so that people can see themselves in my vision of my own reality. So people could say, you know what, that Danny Miranda guy, he's inspired me for this reason or that reason. And I love and accept and bring on that responsibility because I want to be all I can be. We got one shot at this floating rock in space. So I'm excited to see how it unfolds. But yeah, that's what's in my future. What's in your future, man?
I think about it every day. First and foremost, I'm the father of a beautiful, on Friday, 7-week-old baby girl. So wow. That's been the most fantastic experience to ever happen to me. So I appreciate you asking the question. And I think what's in my future is making sure that I become the best human possible on a daily basis to continue to elevate and provide for my daughter, my wife, and the family that we're building. And just there, I don't know if you ever read The Coddling of the American Mind, but there's and this line, when someone draws a circle to keep you out, you draw a bigger one to bring them back in. And that always resonates with me because I try to elevate the people around me. I mean, for God's sakes, the podcast is called Inside the Inspired. It's all about inspiring other individuals to make something of themselves. So I'm going to continue on this mission, and it'll reveal itself hopefully in interacting with high caliber individuals like yourself and sharing your perspectives and shaping the world in a much more holistic way than skewed perceptions and biases can dictate. I think creating a sense of openness in the world and understanding is very important. It's a little bit naive too, but I think at the same time it's important. But I'm excited about your course, The Art of Interviewing. And I'd love to know what drove you to design it and what are the plans for it?
I think you learn best by teaching. And so I was teaching and I'm going through all this material and I was like, wow, I'm learning this again. I'm learning this again. Because you really have to break down what it is you're doing. And you have to look at other people in a more detailed manner and be like, I love when this person does this. Why do I love that? And how can I explain that to someone else? So for me, the course came about because I said to myself, well, I didn't say anything to myself. Layla Hormozi came on the podcast and told me I was a great interviewer. And I said, I've heard that enough times for me to actually create a resource around this. And I wasn't telling her that I was creating a resource, but it was just in the back of my head. And she gave me that confirmation of like, she didn't have to say that. It was off air. It was after it was over. And I was like, all right, I actually will do this now. It was a really cool moment. And it really was the thing that pushed me over the edge to start, because I know her bar for excellence is so high. So I was like, I'll do it. I'll do it. So I started developing a plan. I went through the interviews that I do. I started to just break it down into modules, into steps, play by play, breaking down each header of like, how do I get a great guest? Like people ask me that all the time. So I really thought about, okay, what is step 1? What is step 2? What is step 3? How can I explain this to people? How can I show examples of this? How do I do research? People ask me all the time, how do you do this research? So step 1, step 2. And so I just did that over and over again for everything that I do. And, I put 3,000 hours in studying interviewing. Like it is insane. I'm looking at my YouTube premium and it's like, I've watched videos for 1,200 hours. And I'm like, oh my Lord. And that's not Spotify too. That's not the time I spent on my own podcast. So I've spent like 1,000 hours listening just to videos, communication, media. Like, could you imagine how that's going to compound over the next 10 years? It's crazy. And it just gives you a sense for my love of media, my love of interviews, and my love of people communicating. And so I just broke down the process. I said, this is what I do. This is how I think about it. This is the examples that are interesting to me. And what I love about it, and you mentioned the future of art of interviewing, it's like, I'm getting such amazing feedback on it. And I'm getting so many more ideas from talking about it and from hearing from other people that I'm like, oh, I'm going to include this, like a research where someone can look behind my shoulder as I'm doing the research. Oh my God, that's going to be so exciting. A live play-by-play of me doing the interview and my take on certain things. Like this is going to be amazing. So like I have so many ideas and I'm so excited to execute on them. Probably next month, I'll do a complete, like additional bonuses and stuff like that. I'm finding more resources. I'm just so excited by it. So artofinterviewing.com for those who are as excited about interviewing as me, which I assume is very few people, but if you are one of them, check that out.
There's one final question I have for you today. And it's one that I pose to all my guests. Just like you have your challenge, I have a theme as well. And that is to ask you the question of if the future version of you from 10 years from now, assuming he's in that ideal spot, was to fly in and offer you some advice in order to get there, what do you think he'd say to you?
Focus on others more than yourself and keep doing what you're doing. I think that is just very simple. I don't think there's too much to it. I think I'm already exactly where I want to be. And I'm so excited by the person who I hopefully will be in 10 years. And yeah, I wouldn't want any information. I wouldn't want anything like that from present to future. I just want to keep going on the path that I'm on and keep appreciating what I do have right now, because I think there are a lot of things that you don't realize how significant they are until they're gone. And whether that people, events, place, like everyone's in a rush to get somewhere. And it's like, when you're somewhere, you're just going to be looking back at this moment and be like, oh man, I just wish I was naive and didn't know how this was going to unfold. And that was so much fun when I didn't know. And I was working and I was building and like, wow. So I'm very grateful for all of that, for all the people in my life I have, for my healthy, happy family. Like I'm I'm really blessed, man. And I know like it can't possibly be like that forever. Like, so because I'm in such a great spot, I hope that person 10 years from now, it just tells me like, do you realize like how lucky you are right now in this moment? Because I know how lucky I am, and I'm probably underplaying it, even though I know and think about it every single day. So that's it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Danny Miranda, please let the audience know where they can keep up with your journey.
At Hey Danny Miranda is probably the best place on Twitter. Send me a message too if you made it this far, and I'd love to hear from you. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to reflect. I could tell you're such a deep, thoughtful guy. Like just your presence, I could pick up on that. And like I could tell you have a really kind soul. So thank you for having me on the show. And I'm really, really honored to be on. And I'm really grateful for your questions and the insight. So thank you.
Likewise, man. Keep doing what you're doing, and to many, many, many more.